this past year has felt like the easy way out of anything. Nothing. And it has felt like just when it seemed like the sun was shining and we had a new day dawning, there would be some new thing. And I want to be real and truthful with you today. And so there's going to be, as always, a mix of that sunshine that is kind of at the core of life for me. But there is a lot of grief right now, too, and a lot of struggle. And that's, I think, what our call as Unitarian Universalists is to recognize that all is present in any given day. One of us here in this group may be having the best day ever, and one of us may be struggling with grief harder than we have in a while, and some mixture thereof. So wherever your spirit is today, I hope there is a nugget in this morning for you. For me, we got finally election results after struggle and wondering if our election was even going to work. And so there was some relief there in January, only to be followed by an insurrection and demonstrations of white supremacist violence at our Capitol. Then we started to get the vaccine. And the next thing we knew, we had a complete power failure here in Texas. Not just power, but no drinkable water, people who couldn't get to food. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And then we came out of that. And then our governor declared everything is open, no mask mandate anymore. And there are a lot of ways to look at that, but for those of us who have been looking at the numbers going down and thinking, well, our year of effort, maybe it's going to pay off, you start to picture the breakouts and the numbers going up again after spring break. And it's really a struggle. And so I was in a clergy meeting a couple days ago, and it was our first gathering since the Texas Power Outage that we all went through, both as clergy and leaders, as well as just as human beings and people trying to keep ourselves and our families alive in the cold with little resource. And people just went around in the check-in and they shared what they went through. And by the time it got to me, I said, I wasn't ready. I didn't know how unready I was to relive all of that. And sometimes we think we're ready to talk about the things that have traumatized us, and maybe we're not. And so this morning I'm going to talk about it some, but then I'm also going to talk about some things that I've already healed from, in the hopes that those will be of service to us as a sense of kindness to myself. And that's one of the things that I hope you all will take this morning is the question of what kind of kindness can you do for yourself right now during this year, this marking of this year, where grief may come upon us in ways we weren't expecting. So what kind of kindness can you do? Where can you just lie down and give yourself some space? Can you cancel a meeting and just take some time for you? Can you call a friend? This morning, a minister friend reached out to me and said, I'm here if you need me. And I just called her and I cried to her, and it meant the world just to have that one person. So maybe you can be that one person to someone. What I am going to do to witness to the struggles in Texas for you, I'm here in Austin, here in the house where I sit. We were without power for 4 days as it got to zero. And I'm going to share with you something that I wrote a couple days after we got our power back. It was hard to find the words, but this is the one moment where I sat in a grocery store parking lot and I was able to write something down. And here it is for you. I lived in Chicago for 9 years. I still remember how frozen I felt. Patrick's arms around me for warmth on the Blue Line platform at 2 a.m. after a show. I remember during seminary, my friends texting me that I shouldn't be waiting at a bus stop when it's negative 17 degrees outside. Just get a cab. I've been cold. I need to testify to you that I've never experienced anything like what we had here in Texas. It's a whole different ballgame when your city has legalized public camping, but not done enough to actually support people who are experiencing homelessness. And you know that so many people are dying outside. while you shiver under 8 blankets in your 30-degree house. Our homes in Austin are not made for this, if we have homes. When my neighbors raise their voices, I can hear them in my bedroom. People died in their own beds from the cold. It did not have to be this way. And it's not the same as being cold when you know that you'll be on a warm bus or in a warm apartment real soon. It's not the same. Plus COVID, plus no water. Some are still waiting and without. It's been kayak weather here in Austin now. We are grateful for it, but it was also a bit like nature's gaslighting. When you're as cold as we were, it's hard to remember that it will ever get warm. And now that it's warm, it can start to feel like your mind was playing tricks on you that was ever that cold, but it was. And I want to thank everyone who did the hard work of mutual aid, while also reminding people for their spirits that the sun would be coming out again. We needed that message. Hope is real and life-saving, and sometimes much easier said than done. We are still grappling here weeks later with how to decompress, how to balance self-care with accountability for state leaders and systems that failed us and failed us hard. As a friend said when we were coming back, I can't believe we had to have a Monday. People had to go to work after such exhaustion, and we keep taking care of each other. So I didn't want this time, and on the day that I wrote this, I said, I didn't want this gorgeous day to go by without saying that what we experienced was real, traumatic, deadly, and not the same as what most anyone reading this or hearing this has ever experienced, myself included. And I pray that we take the lessons and learn from them, meet the needs of our neighbors who are unhoused or hungry, and make systems change so we never feel that cold and forsaken again. Never, never that forsaken again. And the word forsaken, when I shared that on Facebook, struck a chord with a lot of people. It's a spiritual word. And I believe that sometimes we really need that language of the spirit to name how it feels. And we've lost some of that language as a society, as a culture, but that's really how it felt to be forsaken. And I remember on the third day when it was the coldest and all of our shoes were wet now, and it felt like our feet would never be warm again. We left to go to my in-laws. It seemed like worth it. Even if we were going to drive 2 miles an hour, we were going to get to somewhere with power. And we did get there, and we had one night with power before they lost their power. But I remember leaving my house and thinking that I might not ever want to come back, which sounds silly after only 2 or 3 days, but it just felt, I felt like I might not be able to come back. Like it was just so traumatic to be here. And so when we did come back and it felt like home again, I was grateful. But I think it's important that when we go through something traumatic that we really write it down or record it or honor it somehow, because the human condition is resilient. And I'm so grateful for that. I'm so glad we're resilient. But if we talk ourselves into, hey, it wasn't that bad, or I wasn't so hurt, or it wasn't that painful, how will we ever hold people accountable? How will we ever make the change so that it doesn't happen again, so that people don't die? The truth is, of COVID, of racial injustice, of environmental degradation, of this power failure here in Texas, if we tell ourselves, oh, it's not that bad, then we dishonor the people that died. We dishonor the mutual aid work that people have done to get through, to take care of each other. And we put ourselves in a position to go through it all over again. So I don't want to do that. And so I appreciate to be able to come to a congregation in another state and just testify to the truth of it for you and to be witnessed. It's a gift that you're giving, and I appreciate it so much. the mutual aid work that people did was truly incredible. And I want you to know that. Texans, whatever your cultural or political stripe, we are people who take care of each other. And so there was a lot of, what does your neighbor need? What do these folks need? Places that had been like a group of artists became a group of cooks. People were really taking care of each other. And that was something that just blew me away. And I'm so grateful for. We're all of us, it just felt like a microcosm of the pandemic, right? That there were some delights too. The first couple of days, my kids went sledding in Austin, Texas for the very first time with their friends. We had some fun. My dog that I don't know if I told you this, I probably did when I was with you in the fall. We got a husky rescue dog this year in the pandemic is one of the delights, one of the silver linings of our year. And boy, that husky dog was living his best life out in that snow. He was loving it. So again, we find ourselves holding the complexity of so much. You know, if our power hadn't gone out, it would have been the snow week that my third grader and sixth grader have always dreamed of. And instead it was one of the hardest times that we've ever experienced, but it did include some of those joys. And so that's what I want to talk about today in the bigger picture, as we think about this year of pandemic, as we think about how we glean lessons from the hardest times of our lives. And so when I'm going through the biggest grief, I ask myself, and I invite you to ask yourselves, when have I made it through something super hard before? And where did I lean? What did I learn? And for me, one of the hardest things that I've been through and what a lot of my songs are inspired by is the loss of my father unexpectedly when I was young. Not a child, but too young still. And he was too young. He was 54 and very healthy. And it came as a great shock. And so that was a really tough grief in our lives about 18 years ago. And I still look back on that time and remember not just the pain, not just the grief, but some beautiful things that happened then too. And I want to share those with you. And I want to invite you to think about, again, what you have experienced when you have gone through something and what it's given you. So when my father unexpectedly had a heart attack and was in a coma for 5 days, we had 5 days to kind of grapple with it. And here are some things that I remember that still give me some life, even in death. I remember the way my stepmom invited my mom into the circle of hands in the hospital waiting room so that no one would be left out, despite pain or conflicts of the past. I remember that invitation for everybody to be in the circle. It was very healing. I remember my stepsister's aunt who came to my feet in the waiting room with new reef flip-flops. It was a very small gesture. She said she saw how much I loved my flip-flops. This was August in Texas, and that I had pretty much worn them out and that she wanted me to have new ones. And I'll never forget that. And it always brings up the image of Jesus to me, washing the feet, that someone would come to your feet with such a sweet gesture like that. New shoes. I remember my friends who sat with me, and especially the man who used to change my father's oil in his truck in the town where my dad lived, an hour out of town. This man drove an hour to see us in the waiting room. Somehow word had gotten to him that David Walter was in the hospital. And this man came and he wanted to tell us how kind my father was. And the fact that how often does anyone change their oil? I don't know. I've forgotten since we don't drive anywhere anymore, but that someone who you only see perhaps every few months, that you would know them well enough that word would get back to you. And I thought to myself, that's the kind of life I want to live, a life with those kind of roots, a life of relationship with the workers in your life, and that people would go the distance to tell your family that you're kind. That's the kind of life that I want to live and that I want for our communities. I remember crying and being held in love by people in a hospital chapel with different backgrounds and different theologies than mine. So often people come to a UU church because they've been wounded by another church tradition. That's real, and that's not the fault of the person who's been wounded. But often then we get into this insular place of, I just want to be with like-minded people, which is understandable, but there's so much we can gain in interfaith community. I was a chaplain with the YMCA for years before COVID, and just the experience of experiencing love and comfort from people of different faith traditions has been an incredible gift to me at times of grief in my life. To have a Muslim coworker share her faith perspective, to have someone from a deeper Christian tradition or background share their faith perspective, gave me a way to be in touch with my own family's sort of historic religious perspective. So to be in a chapel in a hospital with people of all different backgrounds gave me so much that I needed in that time. And then lastly, from this very hard time, I remember country music, fishing stories, barbecue smells, all the things that we brought into my father's hospital room, hoping would wake him up, hoping that he would smell them and hear them and come back to life for us. And that didn't work per se, but they still bring life to me. They still bring him to me when I hear them and see them and smell them. Those memories that keep our loved ones alive. And those are the things that I want for our church communities. I want music and food and stories that keep people coming back and that keep life thriving for us. I want a sense of interfaith welcome. I want a sense of small gestures that say, I see you, I know you, I've noticed what your favorite shoes are or your favorite color is. I've noticed what brings you delight. I know your name. I know your kindness. And even if we've had conflict, there's still a chance for us to be in the circle together. I want those things for all of us coming through this time of struggle. And I believe we can have them. We are building the world we dream about. A quote that I have been hanging on to all year, and I want to share with you, comes from Arundhati Roy, the Indian activist and author. And she says, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. Little luggage, my friends. We were able to take very little luggage out of the house when we left in that storm. We took what we needed, but we also took a guitar and a ukulele, and I heard my kids playing music some of the time to get them through. We took our dog, we took some books, we took games. So I invite you to take Roy's image of a portal with you and just take it to heart. What are you going to bring into this second year and the rest of our lives that follow? What joy practices, what delights, what kindness are you going to bring with you? And what can we leave behind? I can't answer that question for you. I know I'm trying to leave behind some of the pain of systemic injustice and inequity and racism and all of these things that are affecting how people get access to the vaccine, how people get access to food and water in an outage. There's so much And we have to work sometimes to leave those things behind. But let's also bring joy with us through the portal. So think about what brings you life. Make sure you bring it with you and make sure you share it with others. Thank you so much for the chance to be with you again today. Being with you is one of the joys and the silver linings of this time for me.